sisters, brothers, siblings in Christ at First Lutheran. It is a pleasure for me to be with you this morning. My name is Zachary, and I am a missionary and pastor here in Central Europe. And this morning I am wearing the traditional Lutheran pastoral garb. I am wearing what is known as a Luther jacket, and these are the Moses tablets. Again, it is wonderful to be with you. Let me take a moment to introduce my family as well. My spouse, Pastor Rachel, is the ELCA's desk director for Europe, meaning that she is responsible for all of the ELCA's engagement on the European continent, the relationships between churches, the grants that the ELCA provides funding for the different projects that happen. Those are her responsibilities. And then, of course, we have our daughter, Dorothy. And she is, in these hard times of coronavirus, a constant joy for us in our lives. And we are so grateful to have her with us and see all the ways she explores and gets to know the world. Yeah. My call here in Central Europe as a missionary is leading the Young Adult in Global Mission Central Europe program. The Young Adult in Global Mission program is happening all around the world. The program is in Mexico, Australia, the United Kingdom. It will be in Nepal. It's in Madagascar, Rwanda, Senegal, Argentina, Uruguay, and then here in Central Europe. The program is all about developing young people in their 20s to better understand their faith and how God is calling them to live out that faith in the world by having a year of experience in a global context. Now, specifically in Central Europe, we connect with our Lutheran partners here in Hungary and in Serbia, and our ministry focuses around education as well as social justice issues regarding poverty and issues regarding the Roma people, who have often been the recipients of discrimination in this part of the world. Now, to give you a quick update, because of COVID-19, we had to send our volunteers home in March. Everyone is safe and back in their own respective places in the United States, thank God. Pastor Rachel, myself, Dorothy, we are still here in Budapest, and for this next year coming up, we won't have any volunteers, but it will be a year of growth for the program and deepening relationships with our partners here in the area, as well as continuing education for myself. And we will look forward to welcoming new people in 2021. When we get young adults that come to the program, the number one thing that they often say is, I want to grow. I want to take this year and I want to grow spiritually. I want to have a deeper, more real connection with God and understand things. And really, that's what the YAGM program is designed to do. It is to stretch our young missionaries to think about their faith in the world in different ways. And see, so many of them are used to responding to God's grace in their lives through serving their neighbors, through speaking with people about how God's work in their own life allows them to be and believe and to serve. They're used to being able to offer incredible hospitality to people in their community. And these are all wonderful ways, of course, to live out one's faith, but they don't often translate so well when you bring them to a new culture and a new language. I mean, how do you speak with someone about your faith when you don't share a common language? How do you help fulfill someone's need if you can't communicate with them and actually find out what it is that they do need? How can you show hospitality when you're no longer at home? As followers of Christ, we are challenged, we are stretched in living out a life of faithfulness when we find ourselves in a new cultural setting. And in many ways, I think that's what's happening now for all of us in this pandemic. Supporting people as they grieve the lost loved ones that they may have, the lost opportunities, the lost jobs, lost security, lost normalcy. We can't comfort people like we wouldn't maybe normally do. We can't just stop by and see how they're doing. We can't just give a hug. We can't just share a meal together. All of these things have changed, and it's different. How we have to interact with one another as a culture is shifting, and it's really hard. And it's super challenging, and there's no shortcuts to it that will just solve the issue. And yet, as these really hard times exist and will continue for an unknown amount of time, we can know that out of these challenges, there will be opportunities for us to grow stronger in the future, though that doesn't always satisfy the feelings and experiences of pain that exist in the present. In our gospel today, Jesus finds himself in a ministry opportunity within a different culture as well. And I'll be honest with you, it doesn't really seem to me like Jesus aces this interaction. And we're going to take a look at that, not because we're better in some way than Jesus, of course not. But Jesus is the head of the church, and we can grow as a church by better analyzing the ways that the church and our leader has interacted. Now, in setting up this scene of today's gospel, it's important to know that Jesus has just come from teaching. He's probably a little tired, but the teaching that he has done was very harshly criticizing the Pharisees and other teachers of the law, reminding them that people are not holy or set apart by God through performative acts. In this case, hand washing. These performative acts don't show how someone honors God, but it's rather through the actions of caring for other people in the community, in their family, in the world around them. Through their actions is how they honor God. And it's very important to know that this time preceding the passage that we have today has often been interpreted to underscore the importance of not discriminating based on race, ethnicity, gender, other prejudices, because none of the things that we as human beings use to assign differences between people have anything to do with the intrinsic value of a person's being to God. After all of humanity was created in the image of God. So what is important, of course, is how we respond to God's love in our life, how this translates to care for our neighbor, care for our world, the creation that is around us, and care for ourselves, of course, too, is important. So Jesus has just taught this very important lesson about it's important how you respond to God's love and your actions, not who you are or what you were doing. And he's just taught this important lesson, and he's approached by a Samaritan woman who is desperate for his help. And what does he do? Well, it's kind of brutal. At first, it seems like he ignores her, and then he tells her that he's not here to help her. And then he kind of calls her a dog in a sideways sort of way, but he does. And then, of course, finally, he responds to her faith and her persistence, and her request is fulfilled. Now, one part of our understanding of this text that is very important is to recognize how incredible this Samaritan woman was in this interaction, right? She did everything right in this situation. She was faithful. She was persistent. She showed understanding of Jesus' power, who he was. She even tried to show that they shared a common humanity. They shared these ethnic roots when she said the son of David, tying them to a common ancestor. She stayed calm throughout the constant denials, as well as being called subhuman. I mean, really, bravo. I certainly would not have responded so graciously, I'm sure. So that's one side of this interaction. It's also really important that we analyze Jesus's part in this interaction. Because the thing is, he carried all of the power in this interaction. If we think about it, he was a man interacting with a woman. So there's a power dynamic there. He was a Jewish man surrounded by other Jewish men, the disciples that were with him, and he was interacting with a Samaritan. Not to mention the fact that he was the Son of God. So he had all the power in this interaction. And sadly, we see that Jesus judged her as unworthy of his time and energy, at least in part because of her ethnicity. And of course, we shouldn't ignore the gender dynamic as well. And yet, for some reason, Jesus thought it would be acceptable to diminish her humanity by insulting her and calling her and her people dogs. And the reason I have to point this out is because of the really serious implications of dehumanizing people that we study and we live with the realities of here in Central Europe. Of course, I'm talking about genocide and the Holocaust, of dehumanizing Jewish people and many other people, including Roma people, because as you dehumanize someone, it's easier to eventually not take care of them and to even, as in the Holocaust, to kill them. So we have these very recent histories of not just the Holocaust, but also the Balkan Wars of the 1990s and the early 2000s of genocide. So we have to be very, very cognizant of how we speak of people. So this story today, really, it emphasizes to me Jesus' humanity more than his divinity. We can see how he was influenced by the prejudices, the dynamics, the gender dynamics of his day. But we also know that while this wasn't his most gracious interaction, of course, he didn't maintain this mindset about God's ministry and who was deserving of it. I'm going to say that again because it's really important. He did not maintain this mindset about God's ministry and who was deserving of it. Jesus grew in his understanding, and this was reflected in his future actions. And this is perhaps most clearly evident at the end of the Gospel of Matthew, where he commissions the disciples to go and make more disciples from the people of all nations, not just the children of Israel. Well, and that's just the thing, right? We know that God's love is for all of us, and there's no limit to it. And yes, just a crumb of this love is enough to change our lives and to change our world. But God doesn't want to just give us the crumbs. God's love is not some trickle-down theory that maintains this hierarchy of who gets to be closer to God and who is further away. The fullness of God's love is meant for all of us. Jesus came to earth to be with us, Emmanuel, God with us. And we today live as a church in the constancy of Pentecost. Of course, we're in the Pentecost season now, but we are directed by God's Spirit. The Spirit is with us, a rushing and gushing, overflowing Spirit that is meant to fill our actions and ourselves with love. And yet so frequently we allow the noise of the world around us to reduce the gustiness of the Spirit to just a gentle breeze at best. We create excuses, we rely on our own prejudices and experiences without seriously considering the experiences and sometimes the humanity of other people. Now, does this sound similar or familiar to something that you've experienced in your own life as a follower of Christ? I mean, it does for me. And yeah, it certainly rings true in the missionary field as well. As missionaries, we of course are impacted by power dynamics and prejudices that exist in the world. And the history of American Christian mission shows a really painful reality of a lot of the negative assumptions. Assumptions that too often degraded and undervalued the very people we were meant to engage in ministry with. But about 20 years ago, the ELCA became a bit more self-aware of this style of mission. It wasn't doing the best to fulfill God's call to love our neighbor globally. And so it was a time for a change. And some really good folks said, okay, if in fact we are called to share the gospel in the world, internationally, and we are, how can we do that in a responsible way? How can we see the Samaritan woman and lovingly engage with her? Well, we use what is called the accompaniment model for mission. It is a model of church work that is mutual, inclusive, vulnerable, empowering, and sustainable. Accompaniment is defined as walking together in solidarity that practices interdependence and mutuality. We approach ministry opportunities at the invitation of our church companions. Yes, of course, we have a strong heart for service, but just as much we have a strong mind for learning from our companions as well. Our companions, they take the lead and provide direction. We offer help and insights when we're asked, but not before. We work to free people from demons in their own lives, demons like systemic poverty, systemic racism, lack of access to education, to food. We partner with amazing churches and organizations. We help feed the bodies, the minds, and spirits of those in Central Europe and, of course, around the world. And as this happens, we too are fed. We are nourished so that we may continue to grow in our faith and our discipleship. Together with our church partners, our donors and sponsors like yourselves, and along with, of course, the participants in our program, we all have a hand in this ministry work so that new minds, new hearts may experience God's grace in new ways that amplify the creativity that exists in all human beings. Think of the potential that exists for new and creative ministries for people like the Samaritan woman, if she didn't have to spend her mental energy thinking of ways to get the powers that be to listen to her and for her own survival and her family's survival. The amount of energy that she and others could put towards loving their neighbors and reflecting God's love to the world. A whole new generation of people will continue God's work, your work, my work, our work, in new and wonderful ways that we may not even be able to think of at this point, so that God's work continues and that they are able to more fully reflect God's love to their neighbors, both near and far. Amen.